Hi, I'm a curator at the Museum of Russian Art here in Minneapolis, and today I will talk a little bit about the Romanov imperial family and the exhibition that we had about this family. This is the catalog we published. It's a wonderful book, and it was a very successful exhibition, the most attended in the history of our museum, the best attended exhibition. We had about almost 300 artifacts in this exhibition, and it covered the period from 1613 to the present, actually. The exhibition talked about how the dynasty was established in 1613 when Michael, the first Romanov Tsar, who was just a boy at that time, 16 years old, was asked to ascend the Russian throne during a very difficult time in Russian history. Also, the exhibition went through all the centuries, and the focus was on the demise of the dynasty in 1917 and 1918. In our exhibition, we showed the objects that were found in the Ipatiev house. That was the last place where the family stayed, and where in the basement Nicholas II, his wife, and 5 children and 4 servants were killed in 1918. These objects, including some of the clothing like jackets and dresses and blouses of the Grand Duchesses, some of the private possessions of Nicholas and Alexandra, were later, when this town of Yekaterinburg was occupied by the White Army, there was an investigation of the murder of the imperial family during about a year when the town was still in the hands of the White Army. It was captured by the Reds again, but there was a short period when the investigation took place. They tried to find the burial place of the Romanovs. They couldn't at that time. All the artifacts, everything that was in the Ipatiev house where the family lived for several months, and were sent to England, where Nicholas II's sister at that time lived. So the question is, and was asked when we had this exhibition, why these boxes and boxes of things that belonged to the family were not sent to his mother, Maria Fedorovna, who lived in Denmark at that time. The answer is that the Dowager Empress Maria never believed that her 2 sons and her 5 grandchildren were killed. She died in 1928, still believing that somewhere in Siberia or in the depths of Russia, the family still survived, probably hiding from the Bolsheviks or in a camp imprisoned by the Bolsheviks. So she didn't want these artifacts. It was too heartbreaking for her. Her daughter, Ksenia, took all the objects from the Ipatiev house. Later, she donated some of them to the Russian Orthodox Church, and they arrived in the United States. So we borrowed some of the very interesting objects from this collection, upstate New York in Jordanville. There is a small museum there, and you can. There are some of these items from the Ipatiev house that are shown in this museum. Today I have some of the things that we showed in our exhibition. I would like to show them to you. So this is it's not a Fabergé egg, but it's an imperial Easter egg made in St. Petersburg that used to belong to Alexander III, the father of Nicholas II. You can see his monogram in gold here. These presentation Easter eggs were presented by the Tsars, and they were made for these cars. Can you hear me? So these Easter eggs were presented to the members of the family or state figures, friends who attended the Easter celebration in the Winter Palace.
Excuse me, Dr. Z, could you turn the light on so we could see the egg a little bit? The light next to you?
Oh,
I thought you had a desk lamp next to you.
No, I don't have it.
Okay, now we can see it. Thank you. That's great.
Yeah. Can you see it?
Yeah. Maybe thumbs up.
Also, we have this photograph of Nicholas II and his son in the original frame made of leather. You can see all the imperial insignia, the emblem, the double-headed eagle. There's the Romanov crest. Probably you may know that the Romanovs had their own family crest or family coat of arms. That was the griffin right here, the winged griffin. So that's quite a unique object. Also, I would like to show you this photograph of the imperial family, all 7 of them, and the 4 people, the 4 servants that were assassinated together with the family in the Ipatiev house in the Urals, the town of Yekaterinburg. So this was part of the exhibition as well. So the objects that we showed in this exhibition came to the United States in 2 different ways. Some of them were brought here by the people who knew the family and or were members of the family. There are some Romanovs are in the United States. And these objects represent connection and memory and love in the final say. And some of the objects arrived here from the auctions of London, Berlin, and Paris that were sold there in the 1930s by the Soviet government. The Soviet government started capitalizing on the treasures that were still left in the imperial families, and quite a lot of imperial porcelain and the Fabergé items were sold at the auctions, and they are dispersed now in many, many private collections across the globe. And these objects represent disconnection. They represent violence and death, after all. So all of these 2 different kinds of objects met or came together in this exhibition to tell the story of the family and also of the end of demise of the family, of the dispersal of the Romanov dynasty and the dispersal of the treasures around the globe. Even here in Minneapolis, we found collections that had imperial objects in their possession. Small private collections had some Fabergé items. They had some other things, like a cup that belonged to Peter the Great. Here in Minneapolis and Wisconsin actually moved to a different location. So we can say that no matter how hard the Bolsheviks tried to annihilate, tried to completely destroy the family and even the memory about this family through the sale of imperial treasures, it didn't happen. If there are some objects that can be found here in Minneapolis that belong to the Romanovs, it means that they are everywhere. They are in the state where you live. So the family, the legacy of the family lives on. And now I would like to take some of the questions. I think I could try to answer some of your questions.
Hi, I'm Alexa, and I have a question. Can you explain how the events of World War I tie together with the Russian Revolution?
Yeah, we are actually going to have an exhibition about the World War I events. Well, the World War I, as all great wars, was a great stress on the country and the monarchy. There was a lot of unhappiness in the governmental circles. A lot of soldiers who actually came from peasants became very politicized at the front. The Bolsheviks, who started their activities actually at the end of the 19th century, began to send their what they call agitators, and a lot of soldiers, thousands and thousands, became very interested in participating in the politics. And as you know, the Bolsheviks' agenda was very populist. Lenin, when he came to power in 1917, he said that there are three goals that the Soviets want to pursue. It's land to the people, bread to the hungry, and peace to the nations. It was very appealing, you know, it was hard to beat. And this was one of the things that the World War I contributed to, the way it contributed to the revolution. And there was a lot of discord in the upper circles in the government, how to deal with the situation. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Z, we have another question for you. Come on up.
Mm-hmm.
Right down here so she can see.
Okay, my question was, are there any scientific reasons for Rasputin surviving the many attacks on his life?
No, he was a strong person. Besides, the story is a bit more complicated. For example, it is believed, and in many books they write that Rasputin was poisoned first. He was given some cyanide, really a very, very harsh poison. And after that, he was shot. And he could still run out of the mansion to the river where this happened. Well, the poison that was used was put into a cream cake with a lot of sugar, and sugar neutralizes this poison. So the people who participated, who organized this attempt on his life, should have learned their chemistry better. So the poison did not quite work. Some of them were not really great at firearms, so they missed the first time. Rasputin was a very strong person. He was a wandering monk. He walked from Siberia to St. Petersburg probably most of the way on foot. He just walked the way. So he was very strong. But the story, you have to really research the story and read some, not just one or two sources, just read around this assassination and you will find many interesting facts about it. But it seems like this is a proven fact that the poison did not work because of the sugar in the cake. And he was given this cake because he was a sweet tooth. They knew he would eat it for sure. I hope this answers some of your questions.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we have two more. Come on up, guys. Just come right up here so she can see you.
Mm-hmm. Hi.
Do you have any artifacts from Bloody Sunday in your museum?
No, not from the Bloody Sunday, but I have this artifact. This is a cup of sorrow. Can you see it? In Russian, we call it the Kodinka cup. If you know the story of Nicholas II's coronation, Russian Tsars lived in St. Petersburg, but they were crowned in Moscow. That was the ancient tradition in the Kremlin. So after the coronation of Nicholas II, there was a huge public celebration. And on one of the open spaces in Moscow, the Kadinka field, a lot of refreshments were served and also gifts were given. And one of the most desired gifts was this cup. It's enameled, it's made of tin. It's enameled, it has the emblem of the state. It was given as a memento for the coronation of Nicholas II. Unexpectedly, almost 1 million of people came just to fit into that city square. And a huge stampede happened. Over 1,000 people died. They were killed in that huge crowd. And that was an omen. Alexander Drug, Nicholas II's wife, was very upset because for her it was a bad sign, a bad omen that forebode bad for the dynasty. And so we have this artifact. We showed it in our exhibition, and it is now in the museum. You can read a lot about the Kodynka tragedy. It's Kodynka, Kodynka. And you will see probably the images of this cup. But as for the Bloody Sunday, no, we didn't have any artifacts from this tragedy. Do you have questions about probably the Bloody Sunday? Oh, you have it covered.
Yeah, we have another gentleman who's going to come ask you another question. Thank you.
What was the people's reaction to the Tsar's murder?
To what? To?
What was the people's reaction to the Tsar's murder?
Well, first of all, it was not announced in the newspapers. So it was the Soviet government tried to hush it, and there were lies spread, deception was spread about the murder. There was supposed to be a trial. There was no trial. The newspapers announced that Nicholas II was sentenced to death and executed, and his family was moved to a different location, which was a lie. They were all assassinated. But the Soviet government did not want to let this fact be known. And it never actually recognized, it never admitted that the whole family was assassinated. It was never officially admitted during the Soviet period. Otherwise, the fact that Nicholas II was executed, a lot of people who read this newspaper believed there was a trial, but there was none.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
How do you feel about the Crimea conflict?
Well, Crimea was part of Ukraine, right? So the Ukrainian government should have been involved in the transfer of Crimea to Russia, because it was a unilateral decision of the Crimea that is an administrative unit to join Russia, but the Crimean government reported to the Ukrainian government. So it was, of course, badly done. What can I say? It was badly done. Another story is that Crimea has a lot of, a lot of Russian population who support joining Russia, but that's a different story. For example, who knows, probably if California wants to become a separate country, it cannot do it by itself, right? Because it's part of a bigger country. There has to be a discussion. There have to be negotiations. You can't just do it by yourself. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Dr. Z, I'm Miss Tierney. We've been talking a lot this year about the different types of governments all around the world, and especially with the Russian Revolution, we've been talking about communism. And I know you grew up in St. Petersburg under communism. Could you just kind of tell our students a little bit about the differences between growing up in a communist country and kind of what these kids are experiencing here in America?
Yeah, I can talk about it. Well, first of all, sometimes people say here in the United States, oh, we are becoming socialist, or they call other countries socialists. No, the real socialism is very different from whatever direction this country or other Western countries might be taking. First of all, the Soviet kind of communism was an economic system, and that's the main difference. The Soviet communism was not about ideology. It was not about repression or propaganda or anything else. These are just superficial consequences of what the system was about. The Soviet system was based on Marxism, and Marxism is an economic teaching. It's the theory that explains economy and talks about economy and calls everything else the superstructure. So the main thing about the Soviet kind of socialism, or sometimes it's called communism, it was never called communism in the Soviet times. So the main thing is that everything was nationalized. There was no private property on the means of production. And everything else was the result of this major change that happened after the revolution of 1917. There was no private property. People did not own anything. There were no businesses. People could not own land. Everything you had belonged to the state or was handed out by the state to you. And so the people depended on the state for everything, and that's the main difference. And the state saw its citizens as one family, with like the government on top, and it educated its people in the way it wanted them to be, and this was propaganda and ideology. So this is the main difference. And when I lived in the Soviet Union, which was until the very end, until the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was first of all, already in the late 70s and 80s, people did not believe much in propaganda. So everyone knew what it was about, and there was a lot of opposition to the government. At the same time, the Soviet Union was a huge country, and there were all kinds of people, those who supported the government and believed in communism. For example, my father is a communist, and he still believes it's a much better system than what we have here in the United States. But many people believe that the Soviet Union lacked the freedom of expression. or the freedom to be a grown-up person, because with everything owned by the state, the people, the citizens of the country were in a way infantilized. We were all like children. Our government did not trust us to take our lives into our own hands, no, whatever odds. The late Soviet Union had a very good system of welfare, of social benefits for the people. There was free healthcare, free education, so there were a lot of benefits. But still, people were treated as children. They could not believe in what they believed. They could not quite speak what they wanted to speak. They could not own anything. It's like you are a child. You don't have, your parents have a car and a house and you don't have anything. You want to grow up and become independent. So partly that was the situation in the Soviet Union. And then you think about your childhood and you think, oh, how great it was back in my family home. I didn't have a single care in the world. But still you want to be to grow up and be independent.
Well, Dr. Z, this is so fascinating, and thank you so much for sharing everything. I hope that this lesson and listening to you sparks an interest with these students, and I hope every single one of them goes to visit Russia at some point. I think St. Petersburg is without question the most beautiful city I've ever seen, and I hope they get to meet some of the Russian people themselves. So thank you so much for sparking our interest in this, and we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, and I will be calling you in a couple of hours.
Okay, good.
Bye.
Come to Minneapolis.
Спасибо.